Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Ashley Shaheen, and I am the Senior Activities Coordinator for the Wellesley Council on Aging. And a few months ago, I was approached by Henry Quinlan, owner and publisher of Omni Publishing Company, a local and long-term book publisher, and he was looking to book an author appearance for one of their authors, Gerard Doherty. Jerry just released his book, They Were My Friends, Jack, Bob, and Ted, My Life in and Out of Politics, a rare first-hand account of the behind-the-scenes work that led to some of the most influential moments of the Kennedy brothers' political lives and how the son of a Boston firefighter got to be in the middle of it all. Jerry has been traveling throughout the state, including a recent stop at the JFK Library for part of the centennial celebration of John F. Kennedy's birth, and now he is here in Wellesley at the Tolles Parsons Center. After the talk, you are welcome to purchase one of Jerry's books and have it signed. The book signing will happen in the cafe lounge area behind us. As you may have noticed from the decorations in the room, we are also celebrating the Chinese New Year today. So before Jerry begins his talk, I would like to acknowledge the Wellesley Free Library for co-sponsoring this event, in particular Elise McLennan, Assistant Director, and Kathy Betcher, Library Assistant, who has been greeting folks at the front. Hi, Kathy. Thank you both for being here. And then I also wanted to give a shout out to the Natick Senior Community Center for some of their folks joining us today, and their Assistant Director, Lorraine McNally, for being with us. So, Henry, if you wanted to say a few words.
Thank you, Ashley. As Ashley mentioned, I published Jerry's book, and there are a few things I want to tell you about that process. The most important thing is that Jerry wrote this book by hand at the age of 88, 63,000 words. And he has truly been an inspiration, because everywhere we go, and I tell that story, someone invariably comes up to me afterward and said, if he can do it, I can do it. And they're inspired to do it. So Jerry, as Ashley mentioned, is a son of a Boston fireman. He went to Malden Catholic High School, overcame dyslexia as a young man, was accepted and entered Harvard. In the sophomore year at Harvard, he got TB. And he spent 2 years at a sanatorium up in Lake Saranac, New York, in bed, taking the cure. He overcame that and was cured, resumed his studies, graduated Harvard, and then became elected official as a state representative and attended Suffolk Law School. The rest of the story is his major political strategies and some great stories you're going to hear today about the Kennedy brothers and Presidents Carter as well as Johnson. Gerard Doherty.
Thank you, Henry, for the introduction. And I would like to talk to you today a little bit about my life and what the book is about. Henry introduced my early years, and when I was, I think I was 19, I was second year at Harvard, and they found out that I had tuberculosis. And at that time, it was a very frightening thing that a lot of people didn't die from it, but a lot of people never recovered from it. So and I had been very active. I played football at Malden Catholic, and I played freshman football at Harvard. And there I was in Saranac Lake in a place called Trudeau, which had a long history of dealing with people with tuberculosis. And they put us in cottages. And the interesting thing that you sort of marvel at is we slept on porches. They were open winters and summers, and so that in middle February it was not uncommon to have the temperature on the porch 10 below zero. It was a long time ago, and one of the things that would mark it was it was even before television. So at that time, they thought that the easiest and best way to treat you was put you in bed and have you eat a lot. So I'm sure you're not interested in my diet. Can you hear me in the back? Okay.
Can you hear him?
No, Bill, a little down.
Can't hear him?
Bill, can you bend it? Bend it, bend it. That's better. Closer.
Can you hear me now?
Closer?
Okay.
Here, I'm going to push it really close to you. Let's see.
You know, usually a lot of people, I've gone through life with a lot of people telling me to shut up, so now. So I've had my first triumph. Anyway, I was 19 and we had no television. And so I read and I read and I read. And I was there for 18 months in bed. And what they always thought of with tuberculosis, for some reason, you were undernourished. So when I first went to bed, I weighed 170 pounds. And when nearly 2 years later, I still was there. And they came in, a doctor, and many of the doctors were recovering from tuberculosis. And the doctor said, "We have a new medicine that would like to try on you." And, you know, I'd been there for 18 months and I wasn't going to die, but I wasn't going to get any better. So I said, sure. And then we had student nurses who were about the same age as I, and then they had the job of telling me to pull down my pajamas and sticking the needle in my backside, and they would all giggle. And so for 40 days, I ended up taking streptomycin. And at the end of the period, they took some x-rays and they found out that I was on the way for recovery. And so I then went back to Harvard. The last several months that I was curing, my porch mate was a German who left Germany and went to Turkey and was at the University of Chicago, and he was a great linguist. And he was teaching himself Russian. So when he was leaving, he said, "Do you want any of the books?" You know, and I wasn't too tightly wrapped that time, you know, and I'd been there, and I said, "Yeah, why don't you give me Russian books?" So I ended up teaching myself Russian. I then went back to Harvard, and because of my illness, they would only let me go 3/4 time, which meant instead of taking 4 courses, I could only take 3 courses. And sleeping out on the porches, somebody once said that, I think your brain froze. Because when I went back to Harvard, I took a double course, intensive Russian. So I was probably the only person in Charlestown who spoke Russian. And so I had, it really prepared me for a lot of things. And so when I came home, I finished up with the Russian, and I had been very friendly with some people who were very good to me when I was away. And I was at a wedding, and we heard that our current representative was leaving, and so all sorts of people said they were going to run. And at the table I was at, there was a girl that I had graduated from St. Mary's Grammar School with, said, well, you should run. So then some people started talking about me at the dinner, and a lot of them were less than kind in my description. So I got so damn mad, I decided to run. So I ended up starting. And another young girl that I'd gone to grammar school with, grandfather, used to sit in the Knights of Columbus window, and I was always very friendly, and he found out I was running, and he rapped on the window, and I went in, and he said, the mayor is supporting somebody very heavily, and you can't win. And I said, well, I'm still going to run. So he said to me, was the greatest advice I ever had. He said, go as far away from your house where people are still in the district and ring the doorbells and knock on the doors. So for 7 months, I went from house to house and telling people that I was a great American, and at first they all used to giggle at me and said I was on the sun too long. But anyway, thanks to a lot of people, the mayor's candidate came on very strong. However, all the shoe leather that I put in, I ended up going to almost 3,000 homes, and I ended up getting elected. And what then happened was, then we just got inducted, and we were invited, and newly elected members were invited to go to a reception, which John Kennedy, who was that time the senator, was holding. And I went to the reception, and he had remembered how we first met. And he talked to me at great length, and then everybody wanted to know why I knew him, and I didn't want to talk about the accident of how meeting him on the street. Anyway, he was very good to me, and he was surrounded by half a dozen fellows from Charlestown. And we then ended up becoming very friendly. And they would get me jobs in the post office for people. And they would do all sorts of things. In return, I would run errands for them. And one of the great things that was great help to me was at Christmas time, they would help me get jobs in the post office. But the most significant thing that they did was the Navy Yard in Charlestown at that time had about 7,000 people working there. They had different shops, an electrician shop, a carpenter shop. And each one of the shops had a Christmas party. And they would be overly exuberant and have more toys than they would have kids. So somebody finally said, well, why don't we give them to the representative? So I ended up getting all the excess toys, and I started to deliver them. And then one of my friends said to me, why don't you do it the right way? And I said, what the hell, what's the right way? He says, my cousin has a Santa Claus suit. Put the Santa Claus suit on. So off I went. Now, I've got to tell you that being in public life a lot of times, you'll get the best reception in a Santa Claus suit. I mean, it was... Well, anyway, I also ended up doing the sort of Mickey Mouse errands for the then Senator John Kennedy, and his office would call me and ask me if I could deliver leaflets and things, and reciprocally they were very good to me. And so we went along, and John Kennedy got elected president, and about 3 weeks after he got elected, I was amazed. He sent for me, and I couldn't understand how a newly elected president would send for me. And he said, "You've been a good friend of mine." I said, "Yes, sir. You know, oh, sir," and I'm very respectful. He said, "What I'd like you to do is to meet my youngest brother, Ted." I said, "Well, that's easy." Well, it mightn't be so easy for you, because he is going to run for the Senate. And the Attorney General, who was a very capable man, Edward McCormick, was running for the Senate. And so I said, let me meet him, and met him, liked him, and then after about 3 or 4 weeks me dealing with them, the Boston Globe had an article about how a young, aspiring person like Gerard Doherty is so stupid to get involved with Ted Kennedy, because McCormick was going to win very easily. Anyway, to make a long story short, we ended up working and working and working, and he and I went across the state. And sort of anecdotally, we did all sorts of things. And a very memorable occasion, we were in central Massachusetts, and what we were doing is we would have a breakfast, and then we would have lunch and congregate with people. And then after that, John Kennedy was, among other things, his youngest brother was his mentor. And as a mentor, he said, this is how you should campaign. Start on the street at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then go until noontime, and then find where people are eating and talk to them. And then go to 2 o'clock, and then rest. What you need is, the best rest you can get is sitting in a bathtub. So sit in a bathtub for an hour. So that was fine, And then I was out with Ted Kennedy, and we were in central Massachusetts, and we had gone to 3 or 4 breakfasts, and we found ourselves at about 2 o'clock in the most dense wood I've ever encountered. And Ted Kennedy was saying, it's 2 o'clock. And I'd say, I know it's 2 o'clock. He said, the president said I should sit and get some rest, and the best way to do it is sit in the bathtub. I said, that's fine, but, you know, we don't have a trailer. We don't have a bathtub. We will find a bathtub. So we were driving through these old roads, and there was a house. And he said, stop the car, stop the car. What's wrong? He said, it was about 2:15 on a Sunday. He said, go up and ring the bell. And I said, why do you want me to ring that bell? He said, ring the bell. And when they answer the door, ask if I could use their bathtub. So my job also was to be a little bit of Mickey the Dunce. So I go up and ring the doorbell. And it was an isolated building. And there was no answer. Then I rang the second time, and then I could hear some people opening the lock. There was a man with chinos on, and an old sweatshirt. And he said, what do you want? And I'm sure a lot of you have had the same experience of asking some stranger if you can use their bathtub. So I asked for the bathtub, and so he said, what kind of a joke is this? So I said to Teddy, you know, will you get out of the car and just sort of wave at the man? So Teddy got out of the wave, and I'd say it was a very, very powerful wave because the man brought him in and let him have his bathtub. So that was one of the exciting things. But I'm sort of rambling around, and you know, I was very much involved with him. And then I went into, I was a lawyer. I did a lot of housing work, and the next thing that happened was I was doing well, and I did a lot of fundraising for them, and it was 1968. And the president, LBJ, wasn't doing very well. And there was a senator from Minnesota, McCarthy, had run in the early primary and did very well against LBJ. So that was in February. Well, early March, Robert Kennedy decided that he was going to run for president. And so I was, you know, very happy. I was doing well as a lawyer, and Ted Kennedy called me and he said, what do you know about Indiana? I said, 2 things. It's where Notre Dame is, and I've always had trouble spelling Indiana. What do you want to know about? He said, well, they're going to have the first primary that Bobby can enter, and would like to find out something about it. And would you go there? So I went on like the 21st of March, and they had about 4 or 5 names of people who wanted to help, and I met with them, and I found out that it was going to be very difficult because the governor His name was Brannigan, and he was the first Democratic governor in Indiana in like 14 years. And he controlled all the money. And so when I tried to get some help, the two senators from Indiana, I said, we can't help you because of the governor. And so Ted Kennedy talked to me and said, what do you think? I said, well, we can't get any elected officials to help us because they had a very peculiar situation where, by statute, the governor could take 2% of his general budget and contribute it to men and women of his party, so that all the senators, representatives, city councilors would, they were very nice, they were very polite, but we couldn't get any kind of help. And then so I had to get 5,200 signatures in 4 days, which when we first started, the local clerks would not certify them, and we had to go to federal court. And, I was sort of a Mickey Mouse lawyer, and I knew where the federal court was, but I wasn't qualified to do it. And so I found out who did, and I called the fellow, and I told him what I wanted him to do was to represent us, to get us on the ballot. And he said, I've already given $10,000 to the governor. I'm going to support the governor. I said, well, you're a lawyer and you have responsibilities. And he said, boy, you're an awful pain. You're right. So he went in, represented us, and we were able to get on the ballot. One of the interesting things about the whole campaign was the day I went there on a Thursday, and we worked all Thursday night, and on Friday morning, we went out, had breakfast with these 3 young Democrats. And I sort of fell asleep and eating a waffle. I ended up with the waffle on my lap and with all the gooey syrup. It was very gooey syrup. And so, it was, how do you start a day? And so we left, go back to a lawyer's office. And we encountered, it was about 8:15. And coming towards us were a lot of high school boys, black. And now this is a question for the audience. Probably about 1 out of 2 of them were wearing sweatshirts. And on the sweatshirts was printed Crispus Attucks. Now, the question is, do any in the audience know who Crispus Attucks was? Do that again?
Talk louder. Talk louder.
Crispus Attucks. Is anybody familiar with Crispus Attucks? Who was he? He gets a prize. Okay. So, anyway, I ended up, I had nobody, okay. We had nobody to do anything. So I took a chance and I called the principal at Crispus Attucks and told him why I was there and asked if he could be helpful. And that 1 week later, Robert Kennedy would be filing his papers, and he would like to be led to the Capitol by the Crispus Attucks band. And well, he got so excited about it. And then what happened is over the weekend, we couldn't get anybody in the regular political party to help us. And I called the headmaster at Crispus Attucks and asked him if on the following day, which was on a Saturday, and it's a big religious night for blacks, I'd asked him if I could get the Crispus Attucks band in uniforms to go to the 7 black churches, which he did. And we got all the signatures which we needed in greater Indianapolis. And by hook and by crook and by forcing and getting a lot of help from a lot of people, we ended up getting enough signatures certified. And I will always remember the night, it was a Thursday night on the 28th of March, that Robert Kennedy had to have certified his papers. And so he went to the Capitol, and he was greeted and led, and I will always remember it. The Crispus Attucks band, there were 102 musicians marching up that hill, and they were so proud. They were just flying and so proud of themselves. And anyway, that's how Robert Kennedy got in, and it was touch and go. We could not get one single elected official in Indiana to support us, with the exception of a sheriff of a small county who had a problem with the governor. And anyway, through a lot of help, and primarily with a lot of volunteers, we worked at it. It was rather interesting. Robert Kennedy, we were there for 8 weeks. Robert Kennedy, when he first started to go out, he'd have crowds of 10 people. And he would sort of yell at me, I mean, what the hell are you doing? And one of the things that somebody who was very smart told me that, you know, Robert Kennedys were very popular in the East, but they weren't very popular in the Midwest. And I said, how do you know that? He said, when John Kennedy ran in 1960, I said, yeah. His poorest industrial state was Indiana. He lost Indiana by 200,000 votes, and how the hell do you think he's going to win here now? So it was a tremendous chore, and we had a lot of luck from people who had never been involved in politics, particularly women who walked for us and went from door to door for us. And we had a lot of students that came in from out of state, and I had to find a place for them to sleep on Friday night and Saturday night. So our headquarters was in an old movie hall, and we slept 350 college kids in the basement. And every day they would go out and canvass. And it was going okay, but it wasn't particularly exciting. And on one of the Saturday afternoons, with about 3 weeks left to go in the campaign, they had a group of maybe 30 students were canvassing in an area in the middle of the state. And they had with them a fellow who was a person who did studies and did campaign, and he asked me if he could join them, and so he went out and canvassed with them. And it was on a Saturday with just about 3 weeks to go, and about 5 o'clock at night. We were very busy, and a woman who was helping me came in and said, that guy, the guy that wants to poll everything. I said, yeah. He's very, very excited. He wants to see you right away. I said, tell him I'm busy, or tell him I'm in the bathroom, tell him something. And she went out, and she came back, and he said, he's bursting with some kind of information. So I had the fellow come in, and he said, we have it. And we have what? I mean, I was tired and I was grumpy. We have the way we're going to win. And I thought, either he's crazy or I'm crazy. Well, how are we going to win? He said, we were canvassing today. I said, I know that. He said, one fellow went to a door and asked for help. And well, I know that. Well, what the hell are you talking about? He thinks we have the answer. Who thinks? He said, the student. I said, why? He said, the student said to the fellow, who was very disinterested, won't you help Robert Kennedy with a hand up rather than a hand out? And he said, we used that and used that. And that was one of the major features of the campaign. And another 19-year-old girl made a comment that Robert Kennedy kept talking about I. He should be talking about we. And when I wouldn't believe that story unless I lived it. So we went to we, and then Robert Kennedy started to have crowds that went from groups of 50 to 100. In the last 10 days, he spoke in all the major cities in Indiana, and he was greeted by 2,000, 3,000. And when the votes were counted, despite having no real money or a lot of people helping us, Robert Kennedy ended up winning the state by 45 to 31, and the fellow from Minnesota got about 18. So election night, I will always remember it. The returns came in, and he said, we're going to go on television. And I said, I can't go on television with you because I have a great number of people who have volunteered, who came from Massachusetts, and they might not have any money, they might not have any place to stay, and we're going to have to stay. So this was, the radio stations and the TV stations kept after him, and he kept after me. He said he would not go on unless I went with them. So finally, at about 8:30, we had all the people that were out working, And I said to him, we can go on now. So we went to the TV station, and they said it would be a half an hour. And, you know, I had been very much involved with Ted Kennedy for, 10, 12 years. But my relationship up to this campaign was, sort of very formal. And so as we sat in the TV station, he and his wife Ethel were there. And it's probably one of the most moving things that has ever happened in my life. We were together, and he said, everybody considered you to have been my brother Ted's great friend. And he said, what you did today shows that you've been a wonderful friend of mine. And he shook my hand and he said, just will you tell people that I was your friend? And so we concluded the night by him asking me to go on. And I told him that I had to go back and work at my law office for a while. But I agreed as a volunteer to go back and run the campaign in New York. Well, anyway, he ran in California. And on June 3rd was election. And everybody was watching California. And it was clear that he was going to win. And I had my bags packed to go to New York the next day to start the campaign. And my wife and I just put on the 11 o'clock news. We were jubilant, and then the news was interrupted by the story of Robert Kennedy being killed. And so that was pretty much the end of my involvement with the campaign. I have stayed, the other thing that I have done for 25 years, I have just given it up last year at the Kennedy Library. Every May we would have a fundraiser, and I was the permanent co-chairman of the fundraiser. And we started out with the first one where we raised about $200,000, and we ended up being able to seat 4,000 people, so we ended up raising $400,000. And then we wanted to raise more money, and so I was sort of I said, well, fine, we can go to any of the two Boston hotels where we could accommodate 1,000 people. And Ted Kennedy said, no, we're going to be here. And I said, you can't squeeze more money out of people. People were paying $1,000 a seat. You can't ask people to pay more money. And he said, I can, but you can. And so we went through a period of time where we had some people, instead of buying a table for $10,000, they bought a table for $20,000. And then over time, they bought a table for $25,000. And after pleading and hoping and urging people, the last 3 years that I did it, we had 5 different groups pay $100,000 a table, and we ended up raising almost $3 million. So anyway, In addition to doing that, people would say, ask the question, were you paid? And I said, no. I remember after Ted Kennedy won the convention in late 1961, I was his campaign manager, and 2 days afterwards, his brother-in-law came and said, we would like to pay you because I was in the legislature, because you've spent a lot of time and you're very effective at it. So I'm just so proud of myself. And I went home that night. My father was visiting. My father was a handicapped fireman, and he grew up in Charlestown, but he'd only been to the 3rd grade in school, and he had to go to work. And he said to me, so I told him the story, and he said to me, do you have any money problems? You and your wife? And I said, no, we owe still $70 on a couch, but that's the only money problem we have. So my father said to me, don't take any money. Let them owe you. You can always quit. They can't fire you. So that's what I did. I was back and forth with them for 40 years, and I ended up being able to do pretty well on my own. One of the things that it sort of intrigues people is, what did you do on your own? And I do a lot of housing. I've done a lot of things, and probably the most interesting thing I did was myself and another fellow, at the urging of a 15-year-old boy, we bought the Vermont State Prison up in Windsor, Vermont, and converted that to 120 units of housing, and that's the kind of thing that I've done. So anyway, at this point, I'm somewhat rambling, and I try to answer your questions, and you've been you're one of the few audiences that are wiggle-free, and nobody wiggles. Usually it's when the wiggles get intense, it's time for you to quit. So you've been very kind and very attentive, and if anybody has any easy questions, I do easy questions. So does anybody have any questions?
How old are you now?
How old am I now? Well, I'm glad you asked the question. And I have to give you the straight answer. In April, I will be 90. Now, one of the things that I have to tell you is my wife of over 50 years died a year and a half ago. And the other thing that's of event is I am getting married in another 3 weeks at 90 years of age. So that's sort of an involved answer to your question, but so anyway, any other good, yes?
How involved you were with Ted Kennedy?
How what?
How involved you were with Ted Kennedy?
I ended up, with him at at his brother's suggestion, and we became very good friends. You know, I can tell you a very funny story. Right after he won his first election, we were cleaning out the office, and it was on Monday of Thanksgiving week. And about 4 o'clock, he said to me, "I'm going to find out how much of a fraud you really are." And I said, "Well, what did I do wrong?" He said, "I am taking you tonight to dinner with Anna Plesiskaya, who was a premier dancer for the Bolshoi." And I said, "Well, why are you taking me?" He said, you know, I think you faked the fact that you speak Russian." So I said, "Okay, here we go." So we ended up meeting the prima ballerina, and she was very nice and was very formal. And after about, there was Ted, herself, and me. And after, the, introduction things, she was very pleasant. And Teddy was a pretty good needler. He said, "Oh, my colleague says he speaks Russian." And she said, "Oh." And then he gave me the needle. He said, "Say something in Russian to her. I mean, she will think you're a fraud, and I know you're a fraud." So I said something very profound, like, "My father lives in our house." I said, spoke in Russian. And the ballerina looked and said to Teddy, "Your colleague must be very, very well educated, because he speaks Russian the only way they speak Russian in all the educated halls of Russia. So you are very fortunate to have him." So that was, his balloon sort of went down. And anyway, what we ended up doing is he was so excited and so intrigued with him. He then started talking about, it was Thanksgiving week, about Thanksgiving. And she was very quizzical, and so he described Thanksgiving. And if you knew him, he would get overly enthusiastic about some things he would say. And he said, "Have you ever had a Thanksgiving Day dinner?" And she looked at me and used the word, what was stow. And then I tried and sort of, in broken Russian and English, described what Thanksgiving dinner was. So she said, "That's very interesting." He said, "Would you like to have a Thanksgiving dinner?" She said, "It sounds interesting." So he said, "Thanksgiving is Thursday. On Wednesday, I would like you to come to my mother's house and have a typical Thanksgiving dinner." And so she said, "Let me talk to my people." And Teddy said, then you can call Jerry. And so the next day she called and said she would like to go and have Thanksgiving dinner. So we made an arrangement on Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. I would meet her in her company. And there was she, and there were two of these big burly guys with her, and then they had 20 young women that were as thin as you could possibly. They were dancers. So I was the master of ceremonies on the bus, and I'm probably one of the few people who speaks Pig Latin Russian. So I was doing my Pig Latin Russian, and they would giggle and everything. So we got to Teddy's mother's house, and in the foyer there was a big table, and on was an enormous glass bowl with cranberry juice in. We walked in, and they were all very obedient. And the big husky guy said, "Sto," which is, "What is that?" And I tried to describe. I didn't know what the Russian words were for cranberry juice, and so I tried to figure out something. So I said to him, "Saka," which is sugar. Saka. The guy lumbered over and took a little glass, put it in, tasted it, and said, "Saka," which is sugar. Well, these 20 young girls, all at the same time, dived in on that bowl, and with one strip went, So we had a great day, and the ballerina a couple of times was in the city, and she would call us, and we would sit down and have a sandwich with her. But, I did, all sorts of things with them, as I described, looking for there aren't many people who have rang doorbells asking if I can use your doorbell. Anybody else has any question? Yeah, I'm.
Спасибо.
Huh?
Спасибо.
Спасибо. Хорошо. Вы говорите по-русски?
Да?
Oh, хорошо. You know too much of it, so I should. This is the time before you ask me any kind of questions. I should leave. You've been. Oh,
Can I ask one last question? I lived in California in 1968, so I saw Bobby Kennedy about this distance from him on March the 23rd. And what surprised me was how shy he was. Was not big like his brother Ted, who I've met. Okay, was really quite shy and very uncomfortable. And the crowd was not 20 people or 50 people. The crowd was 5,000 to 10,000 people. The Latinos adored him. It was quite obvious. And the following year, I took a class from Dan Fenn, who was one of the first directors of the Kennedy Library. And I saw David Powers come to our class and speak. And it was so obvious how much he adored the president. He said incessantly, during the 2 years, 10 months, 22 days of the presidency of John F. Kennedy. And some of you might know he was the vice president of baseball for President Kennedy. So my question is, and I heard Larry Ty speak about Bobby Kennedy about 7 months ago, and he said, I interviewed all these people, and your age, got upset in tears just to say what might have come if Bobby had lived. So my question to you is, what was the personality of Jack Kennedy? What was the personality of Bobby Kennedy? I spoke to someone who met Ted Kennedy, who went to prep school with him, and his comment about him was not kind at all. He said it was really quite nasty about what he thought of Ted. So from your perspective.
well, let me try to summarize it. After Ted Kennedy got elected, he called me and said that the president, John Kennedy, would like for me to go with Ted and talk to him. And this was probably maybe 6 months into his term, the president. And he was very cordial, and he decided that, and he said that he'd been criticized for not being more involved with local politics. And he was going to reorganize the Massachusetts Democratic Party. And so that was sort of interesting. And then he said, and you're going to pay attention to it, Teddy. And that was interesting. And he said, and Jerry, we're going to make you the party chairman. You know, and I was 31, and, so I said, fine, so anyway, it was great for about 4 or 5 months. All I had to do was, wave and be around. And then they said in July of 1963, the president wants you to raise some money. And I said, well, I never raised money before. And he said, well, the president would like you to raise $200,000. Now, there's a little background to it. There are some people around the president, thought that I was somewhat less than great. And by giving me an obstacle which I couldn't overcome, that would be my end. So I sort of gulped at $200,000. I had been used to $25 dinners. And so anyway, we started to get in. The thing was scheduled for late October 29th. So when Labor Day came and went, we ended up with putting together some kind of an organization, and I had never had any. I had a lot of local friends who were very good. And so the first week, we raised $300, and, and everybody would giggle because, Doherty's neck is just going to get chopped off. Anyway, to make a long story short, I had a lot of local friends who came to work as volunteers, and we ended up raising $100,000. And then we raised $200,000, and then the money started coming over the transoms, under the transoms, and I don't mean to be risque, but we had a wonderful young woman who came from Cambridge, was working as a volunteer, and she was handling the money, and we were losing $100 checks and losing the card that went with them. And so finally I did something which was, my wife thought was outrageous. I ended up with some of these checks that we were losing. I ended up with this young woman, and I said, come over here. And so I started pinning to her chest all these checks. And at a later point in time, we had a testimonial for her, and I told everybody how she had a $35,000 chest one day. So anyway, the last thing that I remember best is the day of the dinner. We ended up raising $700,000. The day of the dinner, noontime, was a Saturday. I was called and said that the president wanted to see me, and so I went to his hotel. And they ushered me in, and he was very, very happy, very pleased that the dinner was raising $700,000. And he said, you should have a reward. Well, was he going to give me the Congressional Medal of Honor? I mean, what kind of a reward were we going to get? He then pressed a button, and an aide came in, and he said to the aide, we're ready. And he said, I'm sure you're going to enjoy this. Well, I couldn't imagine what what my reward was going to be. My reward, fellow came in with 2 of the largest dishes of chocolate ice cream you've ever seen, so that was my reward. And you have been collectively my reward for the day. So I didn't get chocolate ice cream, but I got a very good attentive audience, and thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jerry, for being with us. If anyone's interested in purchasing a copy of the book, they will be available in the cafe lounge area behind us. And Jerry is also going to sign copies as well. And if you have additional questions, feel free to speak with him outside. Thank you.
Chick Edwards, Kevin Leary's friends. Partners with us on Freeman Hill Drive. Great to see you.